Hello and welcome to another episode of the ADHD Goals podcast. I am very excited to introduce our next guest. His name is Devashish Sarkar, and he is at the helm of a pioneering neurodiversity startup. His work is focusing on leveraging generative AI to enhance the educational inclusion for students with ADHD. And the technology aids in mastering organization, social skills, and literacy, while also addressing unique learning needs with innovative technology. Before that, Devashish was former CEO of BBC Worldwide Media and mentor to CEOs around the world, as well as doing some part-time one-to-one tutoring with several students with ADHD. And he's just told me that he's also got a book coming out called Storied Minds, Transforming Education for the Neurodiverse Through Narrative Therapy. So I am fascinating to hear all about that today. How are you, Devashish?
I'm well. Thank you, Laurence. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I hope you're well. And I'm looking forward to this next 1 hour where I will learn so many things by just interacting with.
Oh, well, likewise. I was just explaining to you before we started recording that I'm quite excited about this because with my previous career as a UX designer, the whole startup tech world is very exciting for me. I love being at the beginning of an idea where there's infinite possibilities and lots of energy in the room and trying to get all design and creativity together to solve challenges is very exciting to me. So to have the opportunity to chat with you today about a startup, that would be exciting in and of itself, but a startup that is really focusing on helping people with ADHD, students with ADHD, is obviously going to be a fascinating topic. So I'm very excited. Yeah, so I'm keen to know how this technology works, but maybe before we do dive into what it's all about, maybe you can explain a little bit about how the idea came about, or where the need came from, where your understanding of the need or an opportunity for AI to help out in this particular area.
Oh, absolutely. So my first encounter with the hard reality of what an ADHD child or an adolescent faces was as long ago as 14 years back, when a close relation of mine reached out for help for his child, who at that time was 6 years old. And during that time, I realized that this was a field where the problem was just so large that the existing solutions were, completely unable to actually fulfill the needs. That's when I first got interested. And there's a particular branch of psychotherapy, which is narrative therapy, which was being used. And I got interested in that partly because it was something which belongs squarely in the world of media. Media is essentially about narratives. And I am a media executive. And at that time I was one. So there was a natural inclination towards it. And then after that, I realized the power of narrative. And I stayed with it. I actually started coaching and using narrative therapy personally with students who came to me. I in addition to being in the world of business as a corporate executive at that time, I had always found it very fulfilling to actually teach students part time. So I started using narrative therapy as a way to especially handle children and adolescents on the spectrum, and I found it very great.
Would you be able to just explain a little bit briefly about what narrative therapy is so that the listeners understand what it is and how it works?
Certainly. So narrative therapy has been around for about 50 years now. It was originally developed by White and Epstein, and one of them is from New Zealand, the other is from Australia, and it really came out of the social constructionism philosophy school. And what they did was they started taking that particular discipline and applying it to health patients. What it does is it's it's a collaborative and it's a non-pathological approach
Hmm.
always. So, let me rephrase that. What narrative therapy does is based on collaboration and it is non-pathological. It focuses on the personal stories that individuals create about their lives. The two gentlemen are actually Michael White, David Epstein. This therapeutic model encourages people to separate their inherent identity
Mm.
from their perceived problems. So rather than viewing issues as intrinsic flaws, narrative therapy conceptualizes them as external challenges.
Mm.
So this shift in perspective allows individuals to gain a new understanding of their experiences and empowers them to make positive changes in their lives. So by emphasizing the externalization of problems, by identifying unique outcomes when they are actually successful, and by reauthoring personal narratives, narrative therapy helps the person to reconstruct self-identity within a more positive light. So
Mm.
that's the philosophical underpinnings of our narrative therapy.
Mm.
In traditional education environments, neurodiverse children and adolescents often face unique obstacles that can affect both their academic performance as well as psychological well-being. These challenges could range from difficulties in maintaining focus, maintaining attention, all the way to struggles with social interactions and sensory activities. So, for example, a child with ADHD might find it difficult to sit still during
Mm.
long lessons. A child on the autism spectrum might struggle to interpret social cues, which are so important for success in the school setting. These difficulties can lead to frustration, they can lead to lower self-esteem, and an overall negative schooling experience.
Mm.
So when you incorporate narrative therapy into education practices, it offers a way to address these challenges by creating a more supportive and empathetic environment. So
Mm.
it helps children to reframe their struggles, viewing them as separate from their core identity, reducing feelings of shame, reducing feelings of helplessness. By highlighting their strengths, by highlighting their achievements, narrative therapy encourages children to build a more positive self-image and to develop resilience.
Yeah.
So this approach not only improves their academic outcomes, but it also enhances their overall quality of life.
Yeah.
That's the power of narrative therapy. And what the advent of generative AI does is it allows you to solve a particular problem that the problem of scale. And that's something we can talk about maybe and take a pause. Uh,
Yeah.
if you'd like me to expand on that, then talk.
Well, I was just about to sort of, now that you've explained what narrative therapy is, I can see where I've sort of used something similar in my ADHD coaching. So what interested me about what you said was the separating of the challenges to, externally. The way I sort of do something similar is to talk about the different systems within the brain. So we've got, and this is based on the chimp paradox by Professor Stephen Peters, where he talks about the chimp brain and the human brain. And this is also system one and system two from Thinking Fast and Slow, where the chimp brain is the prehistoric part of our brain, and the human brain is the part of the prefrontal cortex, which we've evolved as humans to do, house all our executive functions. And but because that is so fuel intensive, somebody with ADHD can't necessarily fuel that all the time to think rationally. And it's this part of our brain is that we usually associate our sense of identity. But then, we've got this part of our brain that is really active because it is really efficient, and it comes in all the time. It gets, scared, because we might feel we might going to fail or whatever. And in ADHD, that's really active. But why I say it's good what you said about narrative therapy and aligning those two things together is that when you realize that those two systems are working in the brain, you can allow yourself to say, oh, I don't have to attach to my sense of being when, to my sense of identity, this fear of sort of failing or the things that I've done when my chimp brain was in charge. I can say, that's what's happening when I don't have enough dopamine in the brain. And, it's not me that's failing. It's me struggling with this when I'm in this sort of mode. And rather than thinking that you are just one entity, if you can externalize and change the narrative and say, okay, that happened because of this, and I can deal with that. So I understand how powerful that can be. It's very interesting.
No, that's beautifully put. That is actually a far more succinct way of saying what I was attempting to say. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. So in looking into a lot of the things that generative AI does, I've got a few bullet points, and I wonder if you are able to tell us a little bit more about them. But I'll just run through those bullet points. There's 3 that I've got in front of me, which is it's personalized storytelling, real-time adaption, and gamification and engagement. I wonder if you might be able to take us through those one at a time to tell us how the AI can overcome some of the challenges that students with ADHD have.
Well, absolutely. So I'll start up at this point in time why it is got a global roadmap. It is focusing at this moment on the United States. We are located in the San Francisco Bay Area. So it's a logical place to start. So some of the specific details that I be mentioning, Laurence, refer to the United States. But much of what I'm talking about does have global applications. So here's the problem that we are looking at when it comes to using generative AI. The first is that ADHD, autism, and learning disorders, these are actually chronic conditions. They cannot be treated through medication alone. And the benefits of psychotherapy are only periodic and they're temporary. And because of the vagaries of the American medical insurance entire ecosystem and other reasons, only 1 in 10 patients receive treatment and therapy. Only 1 in 10. And this is the richest country in the world. So narrative therapy is indeed time tested. It's as a treatment method. It has been in practice since the 1980s, but it is time consuming because it is human intensive. And no matter what you do, only very few patients in this country actually receive treatment because there are only about 60,000 psychiatrists in this country. So what we are doing is we are leveraging the power of generative AI to actually start providing lifelong, that's our mission, to provide lifelong support from age 5 onwards. And we will begin with education because that's the first huge concrete brick wall that they face. And if we can start supporting them to overcome this first barrier, then we hope that we'll be able to build over time and stay with them for, as long as they need us.
Yeah, a phrase I like to use is pills don't give you skills. And, particularly, I mean, I'm sort of late, discovered late on that I had ADHD. So particularly in that example is, I don't take any medication, but a lot of people anecdotally have told me that when they start taking medication later on in life, they have all this, amazing clarity, but because they've lived their entire life, with executive functioning challenges, just because they can now concentrate doesn't necessarily mean that they are then able to manage their lives in a way that neurotypical people have learned to. So it really is just the first step into sort of gaining some control over the chaos of what it's like to have ADHD. And like you say, having to have that support there, which not everybody can afford through therapy, and it isn't necessarily, if they could, would it be always available. So I can certainly see the need for having a way that's affordable to get in there and help children at school, because that's at school is particularly where these you get squashed into a shape that you aren't necessarily, and this is where all the issues start to identify themselves.
It is. And unfortunately, we've set up collectively as a society, we've set up a system where it's the child and the adolescent who've got ADHD. They feel as if they're the problem. And, it's just so unfortunate and so unfair. But yeah, to returning to your theme of how generative AI plays a role. So what generative AI does very well, or at least our solution will do very well, is that it revolutionizes narrative therapy.
Hmm.
Because, and this is the topic, this is the point that you touched on earlier yourself, which is the ability to personalize content, characters, images, voices. If you want Harry Potter to be facing that trigonometry problem instead of you, then it is very difficult to do this without AI. AI can do this so beautifully for you. And this is something which, if you're 7 or 8 or even, 13 or 14, this is a moment of liberation,
Hmm.
because now it is your friend, Harry Potter, is the one who's facing the problem.
Mm.
And you want to help him solve the problem.
Yeah.
And then in the process, what happens is, of course, you do it along with the help of our AI tools and our subject matter expertise. But then at the end of it, not only have you grasped the concept, but you come out feeling as if you've done something good,
Yeah.
and you tap into sources of strength. So that's one important application of generative AI, even as it stands today. Generative AI is improving and becoming more intelligent almost every month. So that's one. The second is the interactive learning possibilities which come from all the large language models, all the LLMs. It's huge. So if, for example, we wanted to teach how to solve geometry problems related to a right angle triangle,
Mhm.
then since the time of Euclid, it has probably been done using pen and paper and, trying to draw boxes for angles and doing various ratios. And we've all done this. On a good day, we did it very well. On a not so good day, we used to struggle. How to make
Yeah.
that sine equal to that or that cosine. So, whereas with the bar of LLM, we can have that problem transformed immediately. A problem like that transformed immediately into a picture of a ladder standing against a wall,
Yeah.
and Harry Potter trying to figure out what should be the length of that ladder, and the child actually helping him to solve that problem.
Yeah.
Geometry becomes so much easier when you do, when you use images such as these and infuse it with the power of myth and legend.
Yeah.
So,
I think, one of the things that I think, because I've got two children, and so seeing them go through, education in early years, and I had the pleasure of seeing Montessori for the first time, because I didn't go to Montessori school and I didn't know what it was until my children came along, and had the pleasure of seeing that Montessori education system. And it was fascinating to me to see how more digestible something as abstract as maths. And when I say abstract is because, to take numbers and write them down and to be able to figure that out is quite a hard thing to do. For some people find it very easy. But when you can then visually see like a triangle or many triangles making up a bigger mass, and you can see the size of numbers and things like that, it just becomes so much easier to understand. And to see my children go through that and to see that visualization method being so useful, I think, what you're explaining in terms of, you know, putting something into context is very valuable.
Yeah. And the other thing, Lance, is that because of the ability to infuse audio-visual and an intelligent backbone, which is constantly getting to know you better and better after every interaction, you're able to add other layers to it. So layers which will help you to indulge in more mindful activities. So it is suggested on almost autonomous. It is data driven because we gather metrics from every session.
Mhm.
It allows us to identify unique individual learning patterns, and we are able to analyze these and then propose them as modules for the parent to consider for their child. There's also, and this is something we started with, and it works beautifully, is that after we get to know our child well enough, we are able to take the cues that we receive and actually do a sentiment analysis. We are able to say that, hey, this person is feeling a little depressed today. And or during this particular part of the Monday morning, they're feeling this way. So it allows us to do predictive and make predictions and then, you know, tailor the lessons in to suit that particular sentence. So these are, again, to your basic point, the how is AI helping? These are things which you can do with AI, which you could not do with AI.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was literally having a conversation yesterday on the podcast about talking in the context of what we were explaining at the time when this came up was, sort of playing video games and how sometimes it can be difficult to get a child off a video game because it's so intense when they get into it. And the point of that was to discuss, you know, there might be, if you need to, I'm not explaining this very well. I have to edit that bit. But for example, if a child had to do some homework and the homework was maybe too long, maybe the homework was 45 minutes, but they know at this time of the day, the parent knows that the child only has probably about 15 minutes or half an hour of concentration time. How do you manage that? Do you break it up or do you, there's various different things. And what we were talking about was it's to be able to understand that might be an issue. If the child doesn't understand that at this time of day, they have, a shortened capacity for concentration, they might associate with the fact that they can't complete their homework as failure and label
Yeah.
themselves as not being very good. But if the parent and the child understand what's going on, they can do something, they can work with it to break that up, move in between the exercises so that they can get through it. And I was saying about myself is that, as an adult and knowing all this myself, even though I know that, doesn't make it any easier for me to sit down and record how well optimized I am during the day I couldn't quite exactly tell you how long a concentration period I have at different times of the day. So to be having something like an AI that is interacting with you and is noticing when maybe the percentage of questions you get right or like you say, the sentiments of what you're saying maybe starts to turn into a negative, to be able to then say, oh, shall we take a little mindful break and have a little breather or, jump up and down or whatever. That seems to be incredible that you can do that, because to get that sort of one-to-one tuition from a teacher doesn't really exist,
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Laurence. In fact, I'm so glad that you raised the topic of parents because what I've seen in my own personal experience across so many students is that often when it comes to an ADHD family or a family which has an ADHD child or adolescent, the, there is a silent victim who goes unrecognized. That is the parent.
Mm.
The parent is coping with anxiety, guilt, stress, peer pressure, things which are, inordinately tough for them to manage alone. And they're often not understood at all. They can't talk about it because they feel that it might affect their child even more, might make the child feel even more as a, as somebody who's responsible for the problems. So they keep it to themselves, they bottle it up, and there's a limit to how much yoga you can do. It's you've got to you need support, and in fact, that's one of the reasons that we are actually beginning. An important part of our MVP will actually be the parent guide.
Mm.
So there'll be, there will be something which the parent also is always, had as its, which is based on our AI's understanding of the parent as a teacher.
Mm.
So because they need that support. It's, it's the larger background balance in this country, and maybe it's better in England, but over here, anxiety, depression are the top diagnoses
Mhm.
amongst humans. And in and the scope of the problem is so vast. In the US, there's only one school psychologist for every 1,100 students. That's one school psychologist with students. And there is a backdrop of essentially a very flawed medical services model. The medical health services here are delivered in a very outdated model. It's the patient gets help when the therapist has died, not when the help is needed. It's an old system. And then you've got problems in the declining number of psychotherapists. Then half of the US population lives in areas where there's a shortage of mental health professionals. The reason why adoption at home, which really began during COVID, but adoption of health at home is just moving.
Yeah.
There's a huge, very fast spread of, and overall, apart from the ubiquity of mobile and cell phones, there's a rapidly increasing demand for personalization in all spheres of our lives. So
Mm.
now there's one person who I really like to follow because I've never met him, but I always read what he says. I find it fascinating that Dr. Lance Elliott, he said something. In fact, I think I've heard him say this at a conference. He said something which is, I don't know, I don't remember the exact words, but something like this, which is that he said this last year, kids and teens today and in subsequent generations will be using, to the point that you started off, Laurence, right at the beginning. Kids and teens today and in subsequent generations will be using generative AI as a normal part of their everyday lives, including using ordinary generative AI to be their 24/7, always on mental health therapist.
Mhm.
And I maybe it's a sort of really prophetic view, and maybe not all of it will happen right away, but I can see that this is going to happen very rapidly.
Yeah. I mean, I can see it when you mentioned sort of talking about the parent as well. You know, when a child comes home and they need help with their homework, and but that parent is also juggling the fact that they might have to be getting dinner ready for the siblings, the family, and maybe, they're also thinking about the day that they've had at work or some pressures that they've got there. And, when a child might be having some ADHD challenges and, they just need some time and patience from somebody to help them with it, you know, that patience might not always be there. And it does weigh heavy on a parent's mind in terms of, feeling bad about not always being able to provide that space and time, or not even understanding necessarily what the best way forward is to approach a problem to help them figure it out. And I suppose where I can see the advantage of an AI is it's always there when the child needs it. And and I've never met a rude AI, that isn't
That's
patient
right.
enough to answer in a way that it's programmed to. So yeah, I can certainly see how that would relieve a lot of pressure as well. Yeah. So what other things can the AI do?
So one of the things that we found over the years is that because of the peculiar circumstances in which they grow up, and this also, it's interesting. Very laterally, you touched on this. What I'm about to say, you touched on this earlier. One of the things we found is that because of the peculiar circumstances in which they grow up, uh, ADHD children with ADHD become prolific gamers. They've often, they are lonelier than other children. They tend to be, and they lose themselves in the world of gaming. They become prolific. They become very good at it. In fact,
Mhm.
study after study has shown that gamers who have ADHD or who have been diagnosed with ADHD are much better than other gamers at whichever games being played. I There's not enough research on this, but my own hypothesis is that they find gaming to be a safe environment, and it is something which they can control entirely by themselves. They control the external stimuli. They control their own actions. So we are bringing in gamification in a big
Mhm.
way in our solution,
Yeah.
because it's there is a lot of what you were referring to earlier, which is you know, we will find the right time to take a break, and we will, the AI will prompt them to do something as simple as, hey, just clap your hand, or, just dance a jig, that, or actually the word Gen Z or language for dancing it. So there will be that as well. But when the timing is right, it will say, hey, play this game.
Yeah.
And we feel that not only will it be actually a very positive, psychological stimulus, but the gaming platform itself, thanks to AI, allows us to put in subjects which are being taught into the game itself.
Mhm.
So, for example, if there is under the US curriculum, geography as a subject is taught up in social studies. So we would, for example, our AI will, if there's a geography lesson which has just been, completed and we are doing a break, then what we will do is we will, know, in the game itself, we'll throw in something which relates to, ocean
Mhm.
and rivers and things like that. So the gaming becomes an added therapeutic and education.
Yeah. And I wonder if you might be able to share your thoughts on some of the challenges that you might be facing, because when people talk about AI, they are either in one of two camps. They are either in, or, and it seems to be sort of a binary, black or white. You're either love the possibilities about what AI might be able to do in the future and very excited about it, or you're very scared about the possibility that it's going to take everybody's jobs or something else. There doesn't seem to be much gray area in the middle. And I wonder how you are managing that conversation at the moment in terms of, the way you've described things. And I can see lots of positives and places where that can be really useful, particularly with this conversation about helping students with ADHD. But how do you, I don't know, I suppose, put people's minds at rest that might be worried about the future of AI?
Yeah, it's a real live conversation. And to the extent that children are, and, adolescents below the age of 18 are involved, we never do anything without, very explicit and detailed permission from the parents. With the parents, it's often a dialogue. So we have a parent council, which is already there. And it's always a dialogue. And whenever there are questions, we we feed them within 24 hours. If anyone is feeling uncomfortable, then we also refer them to external sources. If there is research which needs to be shared, we have tons of research of our own, but to make sure that there is not only the neutrality, but appearance of neutrality, sometimes, Caesar's wife, etc. So we actually refer them to external sources to research. A lot of work in this, fine work in this area is being done locally in the University of California at Berkeley, and which has its own center for, AI development.
Mhm.
And so we actually are in an informal partnership with them. So they they have tons of documentation of this. So we refer it to the parents. So far, it hasn't been an issue, but it's primarily because we are dealing with, our initial parent council is mainly from Silicon Valley. So the parents are, they're techies themselves. They live in this world. However, when we go to other parts of the US, we may have to handle this in a different way.
Yeah. So, I mean, I suppose what I'm thinking about is, a common thing that parents tend to worry about is, you know, children obviously of, younger generations now who are growing up with devices in their hands or, screen time and things like that. So I suppose when we're talking about a generative AI being involved, one is imagining, you know, does that mean that there's more time, connected to a device? And I wonder whether you're able to tell me at this stage what that interaction with the AI is. It through necessarily always through a handheld device or a laptop, or is there a speech element where the you can have a conversation with the AI and therefore the child can be stood up and moving around rather than necessarily being, sort of focused on a device?
Yeah, to answer your question, it is cross-platform. So it is all of those things. That includes audio. And in the second phase, there will be virtual reality as well.
Mm, fascinating. So how long, where I'm aware that some of these questions you might not be able to answer, but how far away are we at from having this available for people to use?
Let me give you a let me give you an answer which is going to be deliberately vague. I would say between April and June of 2025.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, that's very exciting. And yeah, I mean, I tend to have, quite a lot of excitement around shiny new objects and I'm keen to see what possibilities are out there. But that does sound exciting. I wonder if you are able to tell us a little bit more about your book that you've got coming out, Storied Minds, in the time that we've got left.
Oh, thank you. So essentially, I wrote this book on the basis of all my experiences in the Bay Area and in the greater Washington, D.C. area where I worked with children for 3 years and 3 years over here. So I've written this book as literally a sort of guidebook, if you will. It's on the basis of working with schools, working with children. Um, it's a practical guide for educators, for psychotherapists, and parents. Essentially, offering strategies and detailed, implementation ideas to improve the academic outcomes of neurodiverse children using narrative therapy.
Hmm.
So I've explained concepts in all their complexity, but also I've broken it down into actionable methods. So you can pick this up and see whether, how, a child who's cognitive and learning styles differ from the norm doesn't mean that person is flawed in any way.
Hmm.
Uh, neurodivergence is actually part of the beautiful complexity of life.
Mm.
And so it's a celebration of that. as well as, practical methods in details. The book is, 270 pages long. Practical details about how to put it into how to translate it into successful actions, successful outcomes, and paradigms which, teachers can use, paradigms which parents can use, and, paradigms which allow the therapist, the teacher, the student, and the parent to collaborate and work together.
Mm. Yeah.
That's essentially what the book.
Yeah. It reminds me of something that an ADHD coach that I worked with, she would say that, if a plant is struggling to grow and is dying, you don't blame the plant. You change its environment. You put it on the windowsill or you'll feed it more water. It's not the plant's fault. It's the environment's fault. And the reason I say that is because we were talking earlier about, I suppose the world that we live in, the economy that we live in, it is all built around a system that, the schools and everything, it's a world where, it's built for neurotypical people. And to be able to change that narrative around the child, the individual with ADHD is really important in terms of helping them understand what their strengths are and what they can do rather than focusing on it being a challenge or problems that they have. Yeah, so it's fascinating.
Just to mirror what you're saying, just to add, this is perhaps personal, but to me, the concept of neurodiversity actually, it represents a paradigm shift uh, in the way we understand human, cognitive variation. It's all about embracing the intrinsic diversity of, neurological functioning, behavioral manifestations as a natural and valuable aspect of human biodiversity, if you will.
Mm,
We talk about biodiversity with regards to the planet, but we don't talk enough about the biodiversity which is there within us as a human, as a species ourselves. So, now, this perspective, it reframes neurological differences not as deficits or disorders to be, remediated, if you will, but as valid, potentially advantageous, variations within the vast, beautiful spectrum of human neurocognitive functioning. So the recognition and sort of understanding of neurodiverse conditions, I believe are paramount to fostering inclusive education environments
yeah,
and implementing effective strategies, effective support systems.
yeah, I
And
totally,
I think it's better for the world at large, better for us as a species.
yeah, I totally agree with you. I think we've always had this biodiversity, as you put it. Um, it's just that since the Industrial Revolution, we have placed more value on specific things and built our world around that. And those things that are, it's more helpful towards a neurotypical person. Whereas, so, these neurodiverse and neurodivergent traits have always been there. It's just that we've now enclosed around it the challenges for people with, ADHD and other neurodivergent tendencies. And so being able to understand and educate ourselves about the differences and the strengths, we can maybe start to unpick some of those and celebrate a lot of the strengths that, for example, people with ADHD have.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
That's there's no, sorry. I was just going to say, like, there's the rich tradition of diversity of thoughts in the ancient philosophical traditions of my own home, which is India.
yeah,
And one of the most advanced, discourses of, what is reality, what is the mind, are found in the Upanishads. And in the Upanishads, it's one of my favorite quotes, it says that see yourself within all beings and see all beings within your own self. And I think that speaks to the very heart of what you and I do.
mm, yeah. So, just to sort of end this episode, I wonder if you could tell us where we might be able to, where and when your book is out. Is it out now or is it coming out very soon?
It's coming out soon. To the publishers were wanting to release it right away, but my wife, who believes in auspiciousness of days, have given them a particular date.
So I see.
So we'll come out on that day. It'll be available in the store in Amazon. And if you and I are going to be in touch with me, I actually send you a copy in advance.
Fantastic. Well, I'll try and get whatever you can, a link to where that will be. Well, when the time comes, I will put that in the show notes so that listeners can get themselves a copy too. So thank you very much for chatting with us today. I think it's a real fascinating topic, and I can definitely see the need for this extra support because, like I say, pills don't give you skills. And I think it's one of the biggest things that we can do is to just really help people, whether it be young students or even adults as well, just to help learn how to work through some of those executive functioning challenges is really helpful. And to make that very widely available with something like generative AI is very interesting to follow. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Laurence. I really love the thoughtfulness and sensitivity with which you actually, carried out this discussion with me. I learned a lot by listening to you. And I also admire you for, the forum that you created. This, it gives people like us a chance to show the work that we're doing. And I'm grateful to you for that.
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, well, yeah, that's made me smile. So thank you very much. Okay, well, I look forward to the next time we can speak and find out how everything's been going with everything that you're doing. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. You take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Well, there we have it. Thank you so much for listening this far. If you want to hear more episodes, then please subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you use. It really helps to spread the word. So if you know anyone this episode could help, then please share it with your friends. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram at ADHD_goals, and you can find me on Facebook too. If you want to get in touch with the show, then you can email me at hello@adhdgoals.co. And finally, if you're struggling to manage your ADHD and you would like me to be your coach, then please head over to my website and get in touch. Until next time, bye for now.